All right, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast here on the E2KG network. This is the deep dive episode of Enough to Keep Going for the second week of November, November 12th. It is rolling along. We are rolling into the holiday season and the sales season. And we're kicking it off tonight with the launch and sale of the two new consoles. This is it. This is the new generation. The consoles are out in the wild, and leading the charge, we have one of our own to talk us through his experience with one of the new consoles. So before we get to that, I am DBQ Hams. I will be your host here on the Enough to Keep Going podcast on the E2KG network. Every other week, we have a deep dive episode where we dive into the gaming news of the past week or so and the game industry. And on those other weeks, we have our playlist. We have our what we've been playing, what we've been diving into and enjoying, but also we give ourselves an assignment. So next week, come back and we'll have our what we've been playing episode along with our assignment. And if you stick around at the end of this episode, you get a little tease about what that assignment is and what you have to look forward to. But for now, I am joined by two esteemed colleagues, and I'm glad to be here tonight, gentlemen. Swissguard, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. It's a little bit of a GX vibe tonight, but I think given that where we are in the launch cycle and just we need to allow this some time, that the console news and review to have some air, to be able to breathe a little bit. And I think I don't really mind that it's encroaching on the deep dive. So I'm excited to hear Agasicles' thoughts.
So yes, and also with us is Agasicles, famous Agasicles. How are you, sir?
I'm good, DQ. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I am interested to hear your thoughts here. So first off, I want to know which console you got, and also your experience purchasing it, because right now they're kind of sold out everywhere. If you don't have it pre-ordered, you're kind of looking at windows when they might come back online. So how did you end up stumbling into the console of your choice, and why was this the one that you chose? Before we dive into the technical specs and your kind of first impressions and reviews.
Yeah, well, like Swiss mentioned, it's almost too bad Osiris Prime isn't here because this is definitely an evening where I would ask the court to please give counsel a wide degree of latitude. Yeah, it's a little weird, obviously, and you guys and anyone else who has listened to me or follows me on Twitter is certainly well within your rights to call me a hypocrite for all of the wailing and gnashing of teeth that I did, a month or so ago about how pre-orders were going and the chaos and how I felt abused and like the manufacturers were not treating customers well, etc. Um, and so I've been, I've recently started an additional podcast that I've been doing with a Twitter friend of mine, KMed, and we kind of talk about some of the things that we do on the Enough to Keep Going podcast, but it's a slightly different vector. And one of the segments that we do is the Wayback Machine, and so we go back and reminisce. We kind of randomly choose a year out of the last 20, and think about what we were gaming on that month, right? We pick a specific title from that time frame, and so listening to him, and he loves consoles. He is a little. I mean, while I've been trying to become a little more agnostic and lean into the PC master racism of the whole thing, not racism, but race of the whole thing, he has been talking about his love of consoles. And I guess in some ways, that, and you guys as well, as we've gone into the bottom part of the year and, I reflected a lot about, what we cover and what we talk about. I've been obviously feeling that tug, and I mentioned the whole time that I was like, I don't know if this is going to stick. So we finished recording. We record on Monday nights. We were finished recording. I was editing that podcast and getting it posted, and typically late at night when I've been editing and posting the podcast, I do like a round trip of like the retailers and whatnot and just see, does there happen to be any stock? And Monday night I just happened to stumble on Target having stock, and so I hit the Xbox Series X and they didn't have anything. I hit the Xbox Series S, and it said add to cart, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. So I hit add to cart. It went through, and again, the Series S in particular, as we talk about specifically what we're going to talk about last night, is so in that sweet spot where it's $299. Like it's like we go back was the Switch 2017?
Yep,
Right.
spring of 2017, and it
So
was $299 as well.
yeah, we go back to 2017, and we talked about the Nintendo Switch on this podcast, and I'm not a big Nintendo fan, but at $299, it's at that price point. I was like, yeah, of course I'm going to pre-order that. Like I don't even really, have to, agonize about that. And so that's where the Series S sits. And so at $299, I went ahead and pulled that trigger. Of course, with the way things are going on now, it's like when you see that, there's this moment of disbelief. If you've ever been, I hate to sound morbid, but if you've ever seen something horrific and you look at it and there's a few seconds of like you trying to determine if that's reality or not because you're not accustomed to seeing it, so your brain kind of locks up and tries to interpret what you're seeing. I've been through that before, and that's kind of what it's a little bit like, right? You're like, I don't know that that's real. So, and with Target, they were, and I really liked it because it was local only, and so you purchased it, but you could only purchase it for in-store pickup. So it was my local Target, a mile or two away. I hit it. It was like about 1:40 in the morning. I was getting up pretty, usually get up pretty early. I was like, come on, I don't know if that's, and it was like, ready for pickup in 4 hours. I was like, oh, okay, well, at least it'll be a relatively short turnaround before I realize that this is all, a fantastic beast and not, reality. And I went in and I went into work that morning, and like about 9:38 or so, I was, I got the confirmation yada, but about 9:38 was about the time that I got the, hey, your package is ready for in-store pickup. So, um,
Nice. It's
yeah,
a rare creature, a real find in the wild.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So you came across it kind of by chance, but I think you're right. This is the one with kind of the most question marks. We kind of know the specs. We know kind of what the potential is on the PlayStation 5 and Series X. But so talk us through the Series S because it kind of lands in the new generation in terms of some of its speed, but also not quite in the 4K generation.
Yeah, and I have to admit I'm a little ill-equipped because, to be quite honest, I didn't really track this one super meticulously, right? In the lead-up window, I didn't pay as close attention to the specifications. I didn't pay as close attention to what is the delta between the Series X and the Series S. And I didn't, other than like the 1440p resolution, and I knew that the frame rates were higher, and it was kind of tailored to a specific type of user. Um, I didn't really dig as deep to it on it. So
And I think that's probably going to be a lot of customers' experience, right? Like if this is out sitting on a store shelf, it's a new console, it's at that buy price. Your experience as an enthusiast, it may not be drastically different than a casual purchase as well.
yeah, and so one of the areas it hits in is obviously it's tailored towards higher frame rates if that is prudent at the expense of resolution. And so and I'll preface this by saying there's a few things, several things we're going to go through tonight. There's also still a lot that I just don't know. Um, some of that because of how it's set up, but also because I didn't think about what I would need to test or check out before I hooked it up the first time. And so last week, Osiris Prime and I talked about how I had been kind of tailoring some of my PC setups this year with my monitor refresh, and had specifically targeted. Now that I played shooters more and I played online more and I played, I don't want to say competitive, but I played more PvP than I had in the past and was participating in like the season passes and whatnot. I kind of finally this year really started paying attention to the notion of tailoring displays to the type of game that you play. And another thing that I did this year that I've historically never done before when it comes to PCs, is I've known for a while that, hey, you may want to play this type of game in this type of setup, but the way I approach PC gaming is just, look, I want to be able to play whatever I want to be able to play anywhere. And so, but this year I have setups and I'm like, I'm just going to put first person and third person shooters on this, or I'm just going to put flight sims and racing sims on this, or this is where I'm going to play my RPGs and RTSs and strategy games. And so I have a couple setups where I have 144, 165 megahertz high refresh rate monitors. This is the first year I've deliberately gone after monitors with FreeSync, um, and a few other things. And so, I was already kind of tuned up to kind of pay that type of attention to the Series S when I brought it home. What am I going to do, or how am I going to configure this to serve my any desires for high frame rate, since I'm not going to be playing at 4K necessarily. And so, so I'm gonna go ahead and start checking through some of this stuff, and I think in doing so we'll get to your question. But if I'm still wandering a bit astray from what you were trying to get at, by all means feel free to nudge me back. So the first thing is, and this is part of this is a lot of discovery and a lot of like things that we thought that we understood, and then things that kind of make me cock my head and go, and so you get the box, you set it up. It's incredibly small. I didn't take it off where I have it set up, but I mean, it's essentially like a bread box. It's the size roughly of like a 10 keyless keyboard, width-wise, if you've used one of those, and it's only a few inches high, and so aesthetically to me it's pleasing because it's not this big, huge honking Mongo thing sitting on your desk. Again, in this realm where I've been looking at moving my consoles over to where I stream, rather than hooked up to like a large screen TV. It's really great in the setup. I have one setup where I have my Nintendo Switch. It's very unobtrusive, doesn't really get in the way a lot, and this thing kind of is the same. But one of the things that struck me is, when I hooked it up, I went in and I went to look at the video settings. And so it easily flipped over to 1440p, which is generally, we've talked before about how I've kind of become turned off by 4K in a desktop working environment, because like they're constantly monkeying around with like scaling and DPI to try and get the icons big enough for me to see. It's just like, I'm just over it. I'm just like, just put the thing at 1440p. And then 1440p is kind of where I think your performance is optimized, rather than scaling all the way to 4K. So I was pleased to roll it over to 1440p very easily. After about the second or third boot, and this has happened before with that display, I have it hooked up to a 4K LG display, and I've seen this before with the Xbox, with the One X. But after about the second or third point, it goes, "Hey, I recognize that in your setup, you can actually be at higher resolution than you are. Would you like me to automatically set that for you?" And so I said yes, and it's set to 4K. So even though it's a 1440p console, at least at the UI level, it will go to 4K if that's the type of display that you're hooked up to. Another thing.
I wonder if but it doesn't do any upscaling because its max is 1440. So that's interesting that it's in the UI. I wonder if it's just the UI is so consistent between the two consoles that it doesn't necessarily matter.
Right. I suspect right now it will go to 4K at the UI, but when it flips to gaming mode, it goes to 1440p.
Yeah, it says on their little comparison, it calls out gaming resolution as a different metric. So gaming resolution is 1440p, and then video, both of them are the Series X up to 8K high dynamic range. The Series S capable of 8K high dynamic range when used with ultra high speed HDMI cable sold separately. So, yeah, it sounds like a UI thing versus a gaming thing.
Well, and it also sounds, the way you read it, also makes it, which makes perfect sense to me. It also sounds like it will handle 4K content for like Netflix, which again would make sense that you wouldn't want to derp the given this whole campaign about the Xbox, even still to this day, being kind of a central hub of your entertainment experience in the home. That would make sense to me. And so that's what I think I have. Again, is 4K UI, which this is a funny thing for me because of all of the hype and the pugilistic efforts at the Sony camp making fun of the Xbox camp for not rendering its UI in 4K in the lead up to launch. So Uh, display integration. Again, the series, which I'm calling now the Series XS, because it's easier writing that word than doing X, hunting and searching for the vertical bar, and then S. Um, of course, it has that capability where it auto senses your display and then will configure performance to match what type of display you have. And of course, if you're coming from an Xbox One, you know that you have that I don't know, configuration, health, and monitoring kind of check sheet screen that says, hey, your 4K display can do this, 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 and this, but it can't do that, 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 and that, right? And it talks about HDR10 and 10-bit and yada yada yada. So the first time I went to that screen, that was all no, not permitted. And like I said, after about the third boot, it went to probably about half. And again, that's because that LG 4K display is an older display. It doesn't have HDR. It's not 10-bit. But as far as just raw 4K stuff, it checked all those blocks. And like I said, went to the 4K resolution. It does have an HDMI 2.1 cable in the box. Again, not something that I've super paid a lot of attention to. I'm starting to pay a little bit more attention to it now. That display I have it hooked up to is only a 60 hertz monitor, so it's not going to do 120 frames per second anyway. And so I don't know, that HDMI 2.0 cable makes any difference at all. But at least using it, I didn't have any problems with getting to 4K.
2.1 or 2.0?
I think it's listed as a 2.1 cable.
Okay, I think you're right
So,
because it's the refresh piece versus a 2.0, which was in the Xbox One X, just to be able to get HDR. Yeah.
What were you going to say, Swiss?
I was going to say it says both of them have a 2.1 port. And the other thing I need to say, though, you said I don't like doing the X, find the bar S. You should know that's a pipe.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I probably didn't know that. I just didn't.
And you just lost a little bit of geek cred with me.
That's no problem at all. That's not I hate using that thing as it is. I use it in passwords, and that's about the only time that I ever use that symbol. So for audio, here's one of the limitations that again, you kind of probably knew about it, but you don't really pay attention to it until you get the thing home. I have gone to using typically optical out on all of my gaming PCs and consoles because for live streaming, it's like the cleanest and easiest audio signal coming out of a component and going in my mixers that I use have audio input. Anytime you try and route it over using a 3.5 millimeter connection, then there's like static in the line, and you have to do all types of goofy gymnastics to try and get that stuff out of there and get a decent audio signal. The Series S does not have optical out. And I haven't looked yet, but does anybody know off the top of their head I think the One X does, or the Series X does have optical out, right? I didn't get a chance to check beforehand.
I have not checked. I was leaning on Swiss there as he had the spec sheet up, but
It looks like they're identical. DTS 5.1, Dolby Digital 5.1, Dolby True HD with Atmos, and Windows Sonic. So don't see anything.
So I can't remember off the top of my head if I noticed when we saw the back plane of the Series X that it didn't have optical out, and I thought that was
go
going
ahead
to
and
be
keep talking. I'll do a little bit of digging here.
Yep. And I didn't bring the controller over here, but that's another thing. So the controller, still the excellence as far as I'm concerned. That the Xbox controller feels great in the hand, feels comfortable, feels like home. Everything's backwards compatible. You don't have to, worry about, I mean, if the new controller for the DualSense or whatever it is, I mean it looks great. I think it's going to be great, but still, at the end of the day, one of my biggest problems, and I've been talking about this a lot this week, is that in the Sony camp things are all very often convoluted and unclear and not always straightforward and just seemingly not necessary, right? And so we have the whole thing of like the new controller or the old controller works, but only for controlling old games and yada yada yada. Right? I mean, I'm not even sure that I'm reciting it correctly. So the Xbox controller, just every past Xbox controller, um, at least Xbox One controller works with the Series XS, and there are no issues. So that is good to know. And in fact, when I first got it home and set it up, I took the new controller. There's a difference in cable. The new controller uses a USB-C cable. The old controller uses micro USB. And so, um, so
Yeah,
yeah.
Swiss is just fact checking there that yes, there is no audio out.
Okay. So, so yeah. So in fact, I took the USB-C controller and put it on a charger to charge. I used one of my old Design Lab controllers and initially used that as my interface. With the Series S, worked perfectly fine. Also, old batteries, and so a Twitter friend of mine was not complaining, but was commenting about how he hates that still in 2020 Microsoft is using batteries, but true to the Apple-esque story about the iPhone and the removal of cables, I kind of don't care because I have rechargeable battery packs that I've been using on, the Xbox One since the 360 days, right? And they're all the same battery pack. So, I just took one of those, threw it in, took the AA batteries, put them in a drawer, and it works perfectly fine. You do get firmware updates. Those do work wirelessly. So for those of us who remember the days when you used to get firmware, first of all, the huge surprise, the fact that you got firmware updates on your controller, but then during the days when you could only get firmware updates on your controller over a wire, it wouldn't go over wireless. It does work over wireless, and that works seamlessly, so no problem. The new controller itself, it is predominantly the same. The difference is that the plastic is a little tacky, and so there's a textured feel to it. So it does give you a little better grip. It doesn't have that super silky smooth surface where it constantly feels like it could slip out of your hand. And so I don't know, for whatever that's worth, I appreciate that. It's got new face buttons. I haven't monkeyed with those too much, even since the Xbox One days. Those buttons do things. I just use them as start and select, just like we've always used those buttons. Every once in a while, I have gone in and messed with like the video or Xbox capture, that kind of functionality, but it's fairly rare since most of the time I use offboard means of doing that. Let me take a breath and ask you guys any questions or ask you for some comments while I get rid of this person in chat, number one, but also before we really dive deep on storage, which I think is going to be the really big story.
Yeah, I think storage really is the big issue here. So I think storage is an issue on all the consoles. One of the things that has come out as these have gotten out into the wild is the amount of actual usable storage on all the devices, on all three, both the Series S, X, and PlayStation 5, is that they may have, a terabyte for the Series X, 900 and some for the PlayStation 5, or 800, high 800s, I think, for the PlayStation 5, and then 512 for the Series S. But the usable storage is much less. So we're in the 800s for the Series X. We're in the 600s, for the PlayStation 5, and I guess please, we're in the 300s for the Series S. Correct.
362 gigabytes is where I was at after receiving the updates. So, I struggle with this a little. I'm sure Swiss feels the same with the way it's a really weird state of affairs because and then on top of that, like our engineering lives, one of the things, and Swiss and I went through this a little bit, when we were working together. I don't know if I think I've relayed this story once before where there was a point where we needed to configuration manage our software versions, and our software versions were workstation specific, and so the manager who was in charge of managing of our configuration management vault gave me some pushback on storing these versions and commented about like, oh, well, we have to go get more storage. And I'm like, I have more storage than that in my house. Like, do you want me to store it at home? But this all goes down the road of, for several years, maybe a decade, one of the things, mantras within software engineering and IT is that storage is cheap. Like, compute is expensive, but storage is cheap. And so it's a weird place to be in the consumer space where there's all this kind of stinginess about storage, and the mobile phone arena went through this, and like I kind of, there's a part of me that doesn't I understand the velocity storage and the PCIe 4.0 NVMe blah blah blah, but like when you look at the convergence of where storage is on these consoles today, and you look at, as you mentioned, like all those numbers, right? There's a 1 terabyte drive, but it's 880 available, and it's 680 available, and it's 360 available, and then you match that with the fact that the Xbox storage, which isn't, I mean, $200 for storage expansion would be okay even on a PC, but that's about what you're going to pay for a 2 terabyte NVMe drive on a PC. It's 1 terabyte of storage for Xbox. The PlayStation 5 not even having it enabled right at launch is an incredibly frustrating thing to consider. Now, I hate to admit this, the neat thing about this whole storage conundrum is as an engineer, that it forces you down this path of where you need to figure out workarounds. And that's sort of where it's kind of fun to live from a technical perspective, because it forces you to consider paradigms and operational profiles that you normally wouldn't. Sometimes that you wouldn't want to, but sometimes, you come up with solutions that you hadn't anticipated, which is kind of where I've been, is this going through this whole, how am I going to use this thing? And coming from a world where, admittedly, I'm a hoarder, right? I download, 30, 40, 50 gig, right? I don't care because, again, storage is cheap. I want the thing right near me, so that I can, when I want to play that thing, I can play it. If I just want to play it that one time, then it's there, right? Who cares? That's, my business. So as we've talked about a little bit in Discord chat, I've been kind of going through what those paradigms look like. And so on internal storage, after putting about 5 games on, I had about 142 gigabytes of storage space left. Now, on a PC, my general approach, and Swiss, you let me know, I'd be curious if you do the same. My general approach is I normally leave 10%-ish of a hard drive free to cover growth, expansion, updates, patches, swap file space, system restore files, etc. So on a 1 terabyte drive, I usually will only fill it up to about 900 gigs. Swiss, are you kind of doing the same thing?
Yeah, I'm trying to think what exactly the percentage is that Windows starts to like make the usage red rather than blue.
Yeah, once you get under, I think under 100 gigs or even under 90, I think it's just when the red starts. But yeah, it's usually.
Yeah, and most of us, most techies, right? You guys are probably the same. We just don't want to see the red, right? Doesn't really make any really operational impact. We just don't want to see the red on our UI. So that's where I'm kind of, so where I've settled on is kind of that 140 gig space. That is going to be my swap file space. I'm only going to roughly put about 5 games on the ready storage drive is kind of what I'm thinking. Now, this whole thing about USB storage, expansion card storage was a big thing, and the thing that I was curious about was how both of the manufacturers are kind of hedging their bets on, Microsoft, their wording has been very specific to me when I read it, and not saying you can't run a game off USB, right? Their wording has been, for their XS enhanced games, has been not that you can't, but that you wouldn't want to. Well, the box says you can't, right? And it's very firm and clear about that. It says, hey, the newer games, the XS games, and at least, we're going to talk a lot about the store, and at least, the games that fall in that category do have an icon in the lower left-hand corner. They have an XPipe S icon that tell you that it's that kind of game, and that kind of game will not run anywhere except on the fast storage drives. So what you can do, and what I've settled on, Osiris Prime asked me to do testing of, hey, what's it like swapping stuff back and forth? Because I think he's trying to assess whether or not the Series S will work for him or not. And what I found out is, so I put 5 games on the internal drive. I said, well, let me put like 10 games on my USB storage. I have like a 7 terabyte drive. Um, and so I loaded a bunch of games on there. I think it was more than 7. I think at the end of the day, I think I wound up putting like 15 games on the USB 3.0 drive. Uh, the XS typed games, when you want to swap them from so you can store them there, and then you can put them on the internal drive, and you can do that one of two ways. You can either move them or you can copy them. Now, admittedly, when I first went into this, I was like, well, I'm going to move them back and forth. But then I was like, well, why move them? Like, I'm not getting rid of them off the USB storage drive, and I want that copy there, even after I blow away the install on the internal drive. So what I've come up with is, what I'm going to do is, I will, when I want to play one of those games, I will copy them over. And then I may do some shenanigans, right? There may be one of the 5 core games that I decide I'm not playing that much, and I want to move those. I don't have a copy, so I would actually move them or whatever. But the point is, I'll copy them over. So what I did for testing, and it's not thorough, it's anecdotal, but it's a good, let me check, what the windage on this is. I took Forza Horizon 4, which is about 72 gigs, with it and all of its baggage. And what I mean by that is, I have the VIP pass and the car packs and yada, yada, yada. Moving that over runs at about 1 minute per 10 terabytes, per 10 gigabytes of space. And so basically a 70-something gigabyte game is going to take you about 7 minutes to move. Now for me, again, as I mentioned in chat, like I typically plan ahead what I'm planning on playing. And so that's an operationally feasible paradigm, right? I come in, it's a Saturday, I get the kids to bed, I want to play Forza, it's not loaded on my internal drive. I come down to the studio, I run the swap, I go off and make coffee or putz around for, right? It's not an offensive amount of time to manage that. And I think it's reasonable.
And it's
Yeah,
also
go ahead.
something that you can be playing something else on top of something that's installed while it's moving, right? Because it's unlike the PlayStation where it's kind of taking over the main function, that this is just going on in the background. So you could be playing something else that's already on your hard drive as you're moving files as well.
Yeah, I think, so particularly for people who come from a deep PC background, there are things you can do and things that you may not do. So I would probably just run the swap and walk away from the box.
That's fair enough. As
Yeah,
somebody who tells his kid to stop playing Minecraft when he's trying to upload or process a video in
right,
Premiere or to YouTube. Yep,
right,
I appreciate that.
right. Now, so where that's going to land for the Xbox is that's going to land on, well, do you need these $200 expansion storage drives? I think for a lot of users, that answer is going to be no. So we've made a really big deal, not we, but the community and gamers have made a really loud squeal about these proprietary expansion storage drives. And I think running this testing, I'm like, why would you need that? Why would you be forced to that? And the other point of this is to say that I think right now, obviously we need to live with it for a while to really see if what I'm going to say now is really valid. But there's this huge question of, hey, is the Series S too tight a suit to put on, right? At the 512 gigabyte storage drive, 360 available, I think it's going to be okay. I think you're going to have some extreme cases that may drive you to want the storage drive, and that's going to be Call of Duty, right? So if stinking Call of Duty is a 200 gig monster, right? That's a thing that you got to put on a storage drive. And then we have to keep an eye on game growth, right, over time. That people are going to want to use, games are going to get bigger, people are going to want to use more and more storage. It's now that level load times are great. I was thinking, well, why don't we double the size of the game, in terms of assets and what the game can do? So, but I think by far and large, for the first year, few years of these consoles' lifestyle, I think the Xbox storage architecture will be perfectly fine. Um, you will have that option of expanding the storage drives. And so the whole notion that, hey, I'm buying like a $299 box, and then Great Set, I'm gonna buy a $212. I said that right. So I'm buying a $299 box. I was listening to one of the other podcasts the other day, and I got book pages mixed up with dollars. So, but I'm gonna buy a $299 box, and I'm gonna pay $212 to expand the storage. That doesn't make good economic sense. Um, Again, I think if you're just buying that storage card just to manage Call of Duty and then use the remaining space for some additional convenience, I think that is okay if you're going to be on the Series S for like 3 or 4 years. Um, and outside of those cases of the Call of Duty use case, I think you'll be fine without it.
Yeah, that's actually kind of encouraging to hear in terms of the file transfer speed, because I think that has been kind of one of the, for those that are aware of the difference in terms of file size, that is definitely one of the things that has stood out to people as a concern. So to hear that the workaround and buying a buying an external drive is going to be a heck of a lot cheaper. You're going to get a lot more storage for your buck out of $200 or even out of $100 than you will at the higher speed SSD. So we got through that. Before we get into the store piece, can we talk about kind of, you've talked about the display, talked about moving games. Can you talk about how the performance, what that looks like in terms of, now we've talked about displays and moving file storage. What does that transfer to in terms of how games look and how they load?
Yeah, so I kind of deliberately don't have that on here, and so just kind of the way in my approach to using the box, I have not. So right, I think your question is getting at the real nitty gritty, right? How does ray tracing look? Does the box handle that well? Are you getting the decent performance in frames per second with all that stuff turned on? Quite honestly, I don't know, and this part of this is going to start to delve into the store discussion, right? There's not a lot of XS series enabled games out right now. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is one of them. There are some new games that have the Dirt 5, WRC9, but there's not like this huge smorgasbord of XS games. The other problem, and this will play into our weekend, is as much as we talk about the capabilities of the box, at least for me, in my experience, here's where the Microsoft approach on services and that having a bigger impact and a bigger footprint is a thing, right? And not necessarily to say that it's a tiebreaker, it's just a different dynamic in that camp, because when you turn the Xbox Series S on, and you go to see, first of all, I was looking at the box, and I still kind of may after this initial thing of that box that's gonna be my Game Pass box, right? And I don't necessarily need to worry about buying the newer games on that. I can probably just use that just to play Game Pass games. You get the box, you set it up, you go into the store, you have all of the Game Pass games, but EA Play just dropped. That's like another 100 games, like another 100 titles. I think it's technically 90 right now.
That sounds about right. Somewhere between 60 and 80, yeah.
Yeah, and these are multiple iterations of FIFA, multiple iterations of Madden. These are some of the core franchises that people buy consoles to play, and they're now available in your subscription service. And so I haven't gotten to a lot of the ray tracing games. I've bought a handful and loaded a handful because I'm playing Anthem. And right, this will be something that we'll talk about, obviously, next week on the GX show. But Anthem has a gravimetric pull that is a lot like Destiny, and so it's taken up all of my Series S time right now. And it is pertinent to the discussion of kind of reviewing the box and what position the box holds in kind of your gaming schema, because it comes along bringing that service. And so again, for $2.99 and $15 a month, right, I have a smorgasbord of games that I can play that fully occupy my time and make me not worry as much about the fact that I don't have a Series X.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, they timed the EA Access EA Play drop very nicely to repopulate some things. I was just thinking as Call of Duty War Cold War launches tonight, that if Battlefield was as big as it once was, the EA Play integration would be much more significant. That having some of that, you lose a little bit there because EA's catalog has not been as robust in the last few years.
Right. And not to marginalize, right, the ray tracing and all the graphic fidelities and whether or not it's a valid tactic to take this approach of making a 1440p high refresh, high frame rate box versus one that does it, excuse me, that does it all, at the $200 price premium. But all I'm saying is I just haven't had a chance to investigate all of that yet, and to take a look at it.
So let me ask you
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
question in terms of context here. Is that you were one of the early adopters on the show for the Xbox One X. Prime picked it up shortly thereafter, and I was the lagging behind a year afterward, gentlemen. But how does this compare to that? Right on the X, you can get 4K HDR, but you're running at a lower CPU. And so are you noticing differences between what your previous Xbox experience was on the One X versus the Series S?
Yeah, because that CPU to me is a quality of life enabler, and so things like, well, and in conjunction with the velocity architecture, but things like loads, things like responsiveness and snappiness of the UI, and to be quite honest, not to say that it plays a huge amount. A lot of it is going to depend on if you're an entertainment center person or a desktop workstation person. I have become more and more over the years a desktop workstation person, and so like having a very large device in my desktop real estate area that takes up a lot of space. I almost hate to say it makes a lot of noise, generates a lot of heat. It's just not as elegant. Like there's a plus, and it may wear off, after a period of time, but there's a huge plus to like the novelty of the Xbox Series S packing all the power that it does in such a small package. Again, don't take it too far, but then the color scheme, and it just makes it a aesthetically pleasant thing to have sitting
No,
on your
I
desktop.
completely agree with you. I mean, from the get-go of the announcements this summer, aesthetically, this has been the Series S has been the console that's the most interesting to me because it isn't a monolith. It isn't this giant art structure. It is something that I can tuck away and I have existing space for it, and I don't need to carve out a new home for. So yeah, I think aesthetically there is value to that, and for a lot of people, it makes it just blend in a little easier as well to their lifestyle.
Yeah, and so the CPU, like I said, probably the biggest thing, the biggest impact again, because so much of the experience to me has been around the store, and the store is so much of the point of friction in your initial onboarding with the device. At least, I had an opportunity to play around with the new store implementation when it deployed onto the One X, and I will definitely say the the One X, it felt snappier and it performed better. But the Series S does it, a heck of a lot more elegantly, and so that's been positive. And again, renders it at 4K, so there's a lot on the screen. It's not scrolling all the way to the right hand side of the UI to get to stuff. It's just a lot better overall. So I'm gonna hit the store really quick for like 2 minutes because we'll probably get a chance to expand on it more during next week's GX show.
No,
But
that sounds good. That seems like a good way to wrap us up in this piece here.
okay, so like I said, you if you bought a One X, especially in the launch window, right? You went through this before, which is you've got to do a hunt and peck for games that have been upgraded and patched so that they exercise your hardware to the fullest, and quite honestly, make you feel like your purchase was warranted. And that's where we are now. Fortunately, there's an optimized for Xbox Series XS filter level that essentially, acts as an individual console or platform. It is in all of the menus under filter, but it's under so you hit filter, it pops out into some subcategories. It's under the subcategory of console. Um, optimized for Series XS essentially is the equivalent of Xbox One X and Xbox. I think 360 is even one of the console filter options. Um, Microsoft doesn't tell you that up front. There's no tutorial like people who get the box, hopefully they'll see the experiences of other people who have been through it. That filter is a lifesaver because you can apply it to your own personal library, a Game Pass, EA Play, and then when you're in the store, you can apply it so that you can like slogging through the store to find an XS an optimized game is just horrible if you don't enable that filter. So that's there. On EA Play, the EA Play games are there. There's an app called EA Play Hub. At least on launch day, that app did not work. It would download, but then you couldn't launch it. And so there are ways to get at a view that it allows you to see all the EA Play games, but it is not necessarily intuitive. You have to do some hunting and pecking. The other thing is, as far as I believe, I I'm pretty sure there are no EA Play games that are XS optimized, and so they're
That's what I
there.
see looking online.
Yeah,
Yes, that they're not that the case, and now even within the store, you don't have to have the hub. Where you used to have the hub, the EA Play Hub, to get. I mean, you do need it for trials. You don't necessarily need it for vault games because they've been integrated into your Game Pass lineup.
yeah, and then the last thing that I'll mention is on load times. So I haven't done a ton of testing with load times. I mentioned that I tested the swapping from USB storage to internal, so we have that metric. I don't have a good metric around load times. I'm not entirely clear whether or not optimized for XS would also include optimization around those load times. So I don't know if I think to a certain extent the velocity architecture just works and improves behavior and performance with any load times in general. But I think optimizing it for XS further implements that at a more elegant level. So with Anthem, again, I'm not familiar with the baseline load screen experience. But from the point where matchmaking completes, it takes me about a minute to load a level. So it's right about 60 seconds. I don't know how that compares to the past, but what I will say is after I've loaded, it takes about another 45 seconds for the other match members that I've been connected with to complete their loading. So it feels like roughly like I'm loading about twice as fast as they are because I'm assuming a lot of the people I'm being match made with are not on the new platform. So that's about as much of a thumb rule of load time experience that as I have right now.
Well, and historically, Anthem's load times are significant, and so your divide there is even greater. So I think that's actually not a bad metric because it is a good, that I've seen that in other cases, on PC where you're matchmaking and somebody's running off a SSD versus a regular hard drive. So to see that on Xbox is significant. I was very curious there. It's something like Anthem where it is kind of coming off the server side, how much of that server side affects the load time. But to hear your experience means that there is some real benefit to having those hard drives that the newer consoles offer.
Yeah, and then I do want to add one more 30-second blurb on the store. So just if you're on the new platform, there's some jankiness in the store you're going to have to deal with. There's no rule that like, hey, follow these 3 guidelines and you're going to figure it out. It's all over the place. There's Destiny 2. I own Destiny 2. There's Destiny 2 in the store, and then there is Destiny 2. What is the new thing, Beyond Light?
Okay, so that's a Destiny 2 problem though,
Yeah.
because even as an Xbox One owner right now, and seeing Destiny 2 in the store with Game Pass, I spent more time than I should, considering I already own it and was trying to figure out how to get the additional pieces. Yes.
Right. So there's that. Codemasters, who I generally love, their incidental piece of news. 2K is thinking about acquiring them, but there's some names that I want to call them that I'm trying to refrain from. These guys on launch day deployed like their deluxe ultimate edition of Dirt 5 to the store, which is like $70 or whatever, I think. So there's been this whole thing of like, oh, we're Xbox, we're not going to charge you, higher prices for new games and whatnot. But yet Codemasters, and I know they're not first party, but they deployed their $70 version to the store. Their $60 version was listed as a pre-order. So if you wanted to play Dirt 5 on launch day and take advantage of ray tracing, you could, but at the higher price. And then eventually, right after they get some people to pay in for that, then they'll eventually let you buy the $59.99 version. So I thought that was interesting. So there's just some jankiness around the store that you're going to have to deal with. And like I said, there's not one thumb rule or two or three thumb rules that says, and so you're just going to have to figure it out.
Swiss, do you have any questions? Any follow-ups?
This has been a long episode for a non-Xbox guy.
Yeah, but as a tech guy, you gotta at least appreciate the dive here.
Gascles was very thorough. So basically, I had my questions queued, and then in his eloquent stream of consciousness, he would answer them. And so I will say that I have been sitting here thinking I need to get involved in the conversation more, but I have nothing of value to add.
No, I think you have done a really nice job kind of walking us through both your experience, but also kind of the expectations that not only us, but all the listeners should have based on your experience. So thank you, guys, because it's very helpful.
Yeah, and hopefully next week we'll be able to compare them to the PlayStation 5 experience, because fingers crossed that I didn't hit a glitch and I was able to order a PlayStation 5 digital edition today as well. So I don't know if that's real. I've gotten order confirmation, but I haven't gotten shipping information. So I may be one of these people, these lost fools who have been told, congratulations, you ordered it, but we're not going to fulfill it. So come back again later.
So this is where the hypocrite Twitter conversation really comes in, right? Like, not only did you buy one just because it was right there in front of you, but then you bought another.
Hey, the slippery slope is more than just a cliche, right?
Did any of us actually think that he would stick with his no console?
No, I actually thought the market would prevent him from doing exactly what he did. Is that there weren't going to be enough supply line out there for him to kind of cave and purchase. But we appreciate your sacrifices and your analysis. So you keyed us up here nicely with a little bit of a story around Codemasters and Take-Two purchasing them. So yes, that has been first kind of rumored and then quickly confirmed, at least that there is an agreed upon deal about $994 million. And it's expected to close sometime in the first quarter of 2001.
So yeah. How much was the Bethesda acquisition?
That was
$7 billion.
Yeah, go ahead, Swiss. Sorry.
No, I was trying to. I thought it was less, but now I recall, we compared it to like the Disney acquisition of Star Wars at the time. So yes, it was a significant purchase.
And like I said, I love Codemasters. I probably literally play almost every single one of their games because they're just a dedicated racing company. But like how does that make you feel? Do you even bother reporting? I guess you have to because of filing rules and whatnot. But I'm like, I would report it and I'd be like, man, I really hope people don't make a big deal out of this because it's kind of nothing in comparison to the 7 point whatever $2 or $3 billion Bethesda deal.
Yeah, it's a relatively small, and it's not like their catalog is drastically at this point, there's a handful of games in the Codemasters catalog, but you could make an argument that there's a handful of Bethesda games as well at this point. So let's keep going on the financial chain, and we got a couple other news stories here. We get NPD, not quite sales numbers yet, but we get quarter numbers that NPD for the quarter 3, July to September, is up to 24% from last year. It's $11.2 billion in the July to September period. This is relatively significant because it is not only is it a time when in a normal console cycle that we'd see a contraction as people were conserving to be able to purchase a new console, but in a pandemic console cycle, the sales continue to accelerate as people are seeking out entertainment that keeps them as relatively socially distant and safe. So that go ahead, Swiss.
I was going to say it also says that video games are awesome, right? What have we looked at with? I want to say that haven't the movie companies been rather disappointed with some of the direct-to-home figures?
I don't. The stories that I have seen is that the theater companies have been very disappointed that
Right.
that the actual direct-to-home sales, like for Mulan, I think have met some of Disney's expectations, but I don't know that we've actually seen straight up numbers and sales out of that like you would at a normal box office weekend type of thing.
Right. I guess I haven't seen the, like you said, the concrete numbers. I got this sense that there was a bit of, I mean, they had to settle to do it, but I didn't get the sense that this was going to be something where they're like, oh my goodness, we're making so much more money hand over fist by just doing it direct to home sales. Let's just forget about the theater market entirely. My point is, there's a lot of entertainment options beyond just video games, right now in the market. And I feel like gaming has surged, but it also shows that, comparatively speaking, gaming is still like gaming is an excellent choice for entertainment. I don't know. I thought it was interesting to compare with some of the other options out there.
Yeah, no, let's keep going with games are an excellent choice for entertainment because we also get Nintendo's sales, their growth numbers for the sales of the first half of this fiscal year, so April to September, which also coincides a lot with obviously in the United States and around the world, a number of safer at home orders and the pandemic. So, but they have seen their hardware sales increase year over year by 80%, that their software sales have jumped by 71%. So that is, that they've had a year over year increase of 139%. So that is really significant, right? Not only is that, as you were just talking about, Swiss, that games are a great source of entertainment, and that there is this industry is significantly large. It's also an industry that is somewhat relatively recession proof as well. Like at the same time that the April to September time period, at least in the United States, that we were going through a significant contraction economically, and with a significant job loss, and job growth but slower, and we've seen sales like this, right? We also, I mean, this bears out the anecdotes of switches being difficult to come by, of a number of strong sales in games like Animal Crossing, which is now the Nintendo Switch second highest software, right behind Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. That we've got Animal Crossing, where Mario Kart's been out since 2017, and Animal Crossing is only 2 million units less than the 28 that Mario Kart has sold, but Animal Crossing's only been out since March. So again, a lot of driving of sales during this period of time.
So,
Gasicles.
so I'm going to take a round of bets, and if you consider the bet invalid, that can certainly be a choice. If the Series S has an impact on the market? And I know we're constrained on supply, but just hypothetically, theoretical, as we go into this holiday season, if the Series S becomes a force in impacting the market, who do you think, right? Because if we assume that the number of console sales is finite, right? And so when somebody loses, then that means somebody has to be gaining, right? And somebody gaining means somebody has to lose. Who do you think could potentially wind up suffering more from a Series S success story? Sales of the PlayStation 5 digital, which is the nearest cost competitor to the Series S, or the Nintendo Switch, which is, the higher end SKUs at the same price as the S.
I mean, I think it's the PlayStation, just because Nintendo has pursued this blue ocean strategy for a long while now, and they're all. I mean, I understand like the price comparison, and you can look at the PlayStation and the Switch as being Switch is an older console, quote unquote, but it's just different. And I feel like it's a lot easier to view the Xbox and the PlayStation as Gala apples and Fuji apples versus the orange of the Nintendo Switch. So that's I would say that if you're looking at the direct sales, piranhas in the water or whatever you want to call it, it'd be the Switch, or excuse me, the Series S and the digital version of the PlayStation.
I was initially going to go the opposite direction, but I think that there is a little bit of safety or consistency that a Nintendo product has because of its place in the market. That if this was a normal year and you had people browsing shelves and you had two new consoles sitting there and one was $100 cheaper, yes, I would think that this would end up taking a bite out of PlayStation more. In a non-normal year, I could see where somebody if Nintendo is also supply chain limited, that the Series S may be the alternative to that. That if but I think that that's a risky bet, because if Nintendo's not supply chain limited, potentially that they see stronger sales still, even in this generation, because if they can get things out into the channels and the Series S ends up being limited, then somebody coming to buy something, at that price point, it still is going to have an option to put in their cart.
Yeah, I'm struggling to find it now. Actually, one of the articles or news articles that I've had queued up, there's a link somewhere where there was an analyst about a month ago that actually predicted the Nintendo Switch would outpace sales of the Series S and PlayStation 5. So.
All right, so we've got a couple more stories, but we're getting close to our time here, gentlemen. I could let's throw it up here. Any other stories for the week that you want to hit and highlight?
I was intrigued a little bit about this Epic asking players about a monthly subscription, and then Game Informer reports the reception was surprisingly positive. So I guess they threw out a survey to Fortnite players, and the within the survey, they asked, would you be open to a subscription model that includes a season pass, an exclusive outfit pack for subscribers, and a monthly stipend of 1,000 V-Bucks? So this survey that was shared, I guess it was shared on Reddit or made the rounds on Reddit, be $14 a month just for like Fortnite Battle Pass and in-game currency. Just when I saw that, and then they said it was surprising that it was received positively, because sometimes for things like this, gamers can go torches and pitchfork really quickly. And but I just thought, for whatever reason, it reminded me of ESPN. So if you go back like a decade, right? ESPN was so big, so massive, and so popular. I remember there were stories about people naming their kid Espen just because of the zeitgeist. It was like, it was cool. It was the community, it's sports. It's like everybody together. Yeah, we all like this together. And right now, Fortnite is the zeitgeist, and people are willing to. It's like the meme with Fry, right? Shut up and take my money. Like, we want to be part of that. My only thing is kind of like, what's the quote at the end of Patton, where they talk about the when the Roman general would return to Rome and he'd be getting his triumph in the streets, and there was the guy in the chariot whispering in his ear, like, all like glory is fleeting or something. Like, this is my warning to Epic. The zeitgeist will turn and Fortnite will become uncool. There will be a point at which it will no longer be a printing press for cash. But until then, if you can get some subscriptions out of it, I guess for people that are like super diehard Fortnite players, getting a battle pass and some in-game currency, you're going to be spending the money probably anyway, so whatever.
I think that's probably part of it too, is that for the people that may have completed this survey, that they are the Battle Pass subscriber. They're I want the hot dog costume, that they're invested in this, that they're maybe it is a better value for them to plump down the monthly subscription. To your point of glory is fleeting, I would say, I was thinking of, ask Blizzard. Sure, they're not at the peak that they were with World of Warcraft, but they still have people paying $15 a month, millions of people paying $15 a month at this point. So there's a revenue stream there somewhere. So,
but as Agastocles might say, World of Warcraft is an MMORPG, while Fortnite is a game mode.
Yeah, but if somebody's going to pay for it, that's there we go. Okay, I think that is a good point, and we got a couple other of potential stories, but most of which, there was the Square sales, that their sales overall were up, but their quarter with Avengers brought them down, as Avengers did not hit their mark, and I'll talk a little bit about maybe why next week when I'm talking about what I've been playing as well. So let's head into the wrap up here, gentlemen, because next week we are back with a Pix Plays episode, and I kind of think it's all of us next week that are here. So the assignment, as we spent most of tonight, and rightfully so, we are at the cusp of a new console generation, that we're going to take a moment to kind of wind back around to the old generation. So as the next one is winding up, let's take a little bit here to look back at what the winding down of our console generation looks like. We want to go back, dig through, dredge up, see what's sitting or still installed in your digital locker somewhere, in terms of a backlog game from this generation that you haven't gotten to. Something that, or maybe a new purchase that you're trying to squeak in just before the end of the generation. So the challenge here, the assignment here, is to pick something from this generation that you haven't. Something that you've had access to play, or but that for some reason you've missed. Either it got buried in a backlog during a busy time, or that you just never quite got around to it. And so Agastocles already hinted at some of this, as I was talking about my multiple attempts with Anthem. He was shaking his head and wondering why someone would put themselves to that torture, and now he's giving it a try to see as well. And maybe there's not as much torture there as he expected. But there are plenty of games in all of our backlogs from this generation that we want to give one last try to. So that's our assignment for this week. We know what Agastocles' game is. So, Scar, do you have any thoughts on what your backlog buried game assignment will be?
I'm trying to think of my way I can weasel out of playing a console game. Is it okay if I play a PC game that's relatively recent?
Yeah, and I should mention, so I did not write this with the intent that it's solely this console generation. So I personally feel like, it's wide open. So whether it's PC, going back to, 2000s or whatever, the major thing I was trying to get out of this was, it's just a chance to go back and like hit one of those titles that's always been kind of in the back of your mind, like, oh my gosh, I need to finally get around to that thing. So I wanted to plop that opportunity out there.
Nice. Excellent. So now you got a little more, in true E2KG fashion, you've got a little more leeway to play within the bounds of the assignment. So, all right, gentlemen, thank you so much for tonight. Swissguard, it's always a pleasure. I'm glad to be with you. And it was nice to have a third chair because this was just going to be you and I tonight until we had the surprise announcement of one of our own purchasing a console. So, I guess please thank you for stepping in and stepping up to guide us through your reactions and thoughts. It's a great place to start as we dive into this transition period with consoles and games being launched cross-platform and trying to negotiate all those digital stores in terms of what's optimized or what is going to or what's not. So, for myself, DBQ Hams, Agastically Stamus, and Swissguard, thank you for joining us here on the E2KG Network. Please come again next week. We'll be glad to have you back every time. And until then, play the games you love those you play with, and be good to each other. Good night.